You say you crave freedom, yet you keep chasing every temptation that makes you weak. Your body, your heart, your restless mind, always desperate for something it can't quite touch. Jacques Lacan would tell you the uncomfortable truth. What you call desire isn't freedom. It's your favorite prison. But today, you're about to discover why the things you hunger for most are exactly what's holding your soul captive. Every desire you chase leaves you emptier than before. Your craving for intimacy makes you vulnerable to people who only love parts of you. Your hunger for approval pushes you into roles you despise, silencing truths that ache to be voiced. And that burning need for pleasure, whether emotional or carnal, never delivers the satisfaction it promises, only the cold, aching sense of having betrayed yourself once again. You think you're seeking fulfillment, but you're running from an unbearable truth. Your desires aren't guiding you toward freedom. They're pulling you deeper into the same exhausting cycle of pain and relief. Lacan knew that desire is never truly yours. It always belongs to something you lost, something society convinced you that you lack, something you've chased desperately since childhood. It's the void left by affection withheld, approval denied, a love you never felt safe enough to trust. Desire whispers seductive lies in your ear, telling you that just one more embrace, one more compliment, one more accomplishment will finally fill that haunting emptiness. Yet the more you feed these cravings, the stronger their grip grows. Freedom slips further away because each desire you indulge only reinforces the prison walls your mind built around your sense of self-worth. You're caught in an invisible cycle of self-betrayal, believing you choose what you pursue, when really, your hunger has chosen you. Every relationship, every addiction, every craving masked as passion has left subtle scars. You confuse these compulsions with authenticity, mistaking obsession for purpose, mistaking neediness for genuine connection. You're a prisoner chasing temporary relief instead of facing lasting truth. But imagine, just for a moment, stepping outside of these automatic cravings. Imagine recognizing them not as desires, but as symptoms of a deeper wound. Imagine having the clarity to ask yourself why certain people, certain pleasures, certain pursuits have become your emotional oxygen. If your desires reflect your wounds, as Lacan believed, then freedom isn't about chasing more. It's about understanding why you chase in the first place. True liberation comes from this unsettling awareness. Perhaps you don't genuinely desire the things you run after most fiercely. Perhaps you've just learned to associate love with longing, comfort with pain, identity with validation. You've confused captivity with comfort, chains with security, repetition with passion. Your soul remains restless precisely because it senses this contradiction. Freedom, the authentic kind, terrifies you because it would mean confronting the emptiness behind your cravings. It would require standing alone, without your distractions, and finally asking the questions you've avoided for too long. What am I hiding behind my desires? What wound am I avoiding? Today, you'll begin unraveling this mystery, not by feeding another craving, but by facing the uncomfortable truth Lacan exposed, that beneath every burning desire lies a shadowy truth you're desperately trying to silence. The freedom you've always claimed to want is waiting on the other side of your willingness to confront this hidden reality. Because maybe the reason your soul feels trapped isn't that you haven't satisfied your desires yet, but because your deepest desires are exactly what's keeping you captive. You think you know what you want. You swear your desires are real, raw, urgent, undeniable. But deep down, something doesn't add up. You chase the same things over and over. Affection, power, approval, pleasure. You tell yourself they'll make you feel alive, seen, fulfilled. But once you get them, the silence returns. The hunger starts again. And that's the hidden truth Lacan forced us to face. You don't know what you desire. And that's exactly why you suffer. Desire isn't instinct. It's structure. It's scripted. Lacan believed our wants are shaped by what we lack. And what we lack is never truly clear to us. You believe you desire someone because they ignite something in you. But what they really touch is the wound. The place where love was withheld. The place where you were made to feel invisible, disposable, too much or not enough. So now, every desire is a disguised negotiation. Not for joy, for survival. That's why you keep running. You're not chasing pleasure. You're chasing evidence that you matter. And in that chase, you give your power away. You contort yourself into who they want. You perform instead of exist. You say yes when everything in you wants to say no, all because you've confused being chosen with being free. But here's what no one tells you. The more you pursue desire blindly, the more it owns you. You think you're moving forward, but you're stuck, looping through the same emotional patterns, relationships, and fantasies. The details change, but the story repeats. Because the desire was never yours, it was borrowed, installed, rewarded, and now it controls you. The pain you carry? It's not from unmet needs. It's from being loyal to a version of yourself that only exists to be accepted. That's not freedom. That's emotional captivity. That's the curse of performing a life that doesn't feel like yours. And once you see it, it hurts, but it also liberates. Because when you begin to question where your desires come from, you start cutting the strings. You start wanting differently. You stop obeying what once felt like instinct and start choosing from clarity. And that's when the shift happens. Not when you get what you want, but when you no longer need what once controlled you. If you want more videos like this, like the video and subscribe now. That's what keeps this page alive for those who are tired of erasing themselves just to survive. You were told that following your desires would make you free. That doing what you want, being who you are, saying what you feel, that was power. But no one warned you that not all desires come from strength. Some are just symptoms of old wounds repeating themselves with new names. And when you don't question them, they don't set you free. They build the cage you now call identity. This is the core of the mistake. You confuse intensity with authenticity. You assume that what burns inside you must be truth. But intensity isn't always clarity. Sometimes it's just unresolved pain echoing louder and louder. You feel drawn to someone who triggers your insecurities and call it chemistry. You crave attention from those who withhold it and call it passion. You sacrifice your peace for a moment of recognition and call it purpose. And each time, you believe this is freedom, when in reality, you're just reenacting your emotional captivity under the mask of choice. Jacques Lacan warned us that desire is formed through a lack that never truly disappears. It's shaped by language, by absence, by everything we were denied and everything we learned to want because others wanted it for us. That means the very force you call will may not be yours. It may be inherited, imposed, even implanted. And this is the paradox. The more fiercely you chase what you believe to be yours, the more entangled you become in what was never meant to define you. This emotional captivity is subtle. It doesn't come with chains or commands. It comes dressed as freedom. It sounds like be yourself. Do what makes you happy. Follow your heart. But when the heart is wounded and the self was shaped by survival, following those voices doesn't lead to liberation. It leads to repetition. The same patterns, the same endings, the same invisible ache. Freedom without discernment is just another prison. You don't escape your past by indulging every impulse. You escape by watching, carefully, ruthlessly, how your desires are built, what triggers them, what sustains them, and what happens when you don't obey them. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not act. To feel the pull and not follow it. To recognize the hunger and let it burn without feeding it. That's not weakness. That's mastery. That's the beginning of reclaiming what was never supposed to control you. You thought your desires made you real, but maybe they just kept you rehearsing the same script until you forgot you could walk off stage. You speak of freedom like it's something you've earned. You dress how you want. You date who you choose. You scroll, you swipe, you say you're in control. But look deeper, beneath the choices, beneath the preferences. There's a blueprint you didn't write. A script you followed since before you knew there were other options. You're not free. You're conditioned. Conditioned to crave certain kinds of love. Conditioned to tolerate certain kinds of pain. Conditioned to think success looks like exhaustion, and that worth comes from sacrifice. You weren't born this way. You were trained. Every compliment you received for being quiet. Every punishment for being too emotional. Every glance of approval when you made yourself smaller to make others comfortable. That wasn't just socialization, it was programming. And now, you're living it so convincingly that you think it's who you are. But Lacan reminds us, identity is not truth, it's performance. And you've been performing the role of acceptable self for so long that the original script, the one written by your instincts, your rage, your intuition, was buried under years of adaptation. You mistake your patterns for your personality. You call your fears boundaries. You label survival as authenticity. And in that confusion, you lose the one thing that was ever truly yours, the power to decide what you actually want, not what was fed to you. Conditioning isn't always cruel. Sometimes it looks like love. A parent who told you not to cry so you wouldn't get hurt. A teacher who praised you for being obedient, not curious. A partner who only stayed when you were soft and agreeable. These moments don't feel like violence, but they are. Because each one carved out a part of your wildness and replaced it with a version of you that was easier to love. Easier to manage. Easier to discard. And now, you love your cage. You defend your triggers. You explain your patterns with pride. But deep down, there's unrest. A feeling that none of this is really you. That you're playing a role that keeps you from collapsing, but also keeps you from becoming. You call it stability, but it's just sedation, a well-decorated prison. To be conditioned is to live someone else's logic, to carry beliefs that never belong to you, to say yes when everything in your body is screaming no. And until you begin to dismantle this system, brick by brick, you'll keep mistaking repetition for freedom. You'll keep choosing the same dynamics, the same emotional traps, the same people with different names. Real freedom doesn't come from doing what you want. It comes from knowing where your want was born and deciding whether it deserves to stay. It comes from burning the scripts you were handed, from betraying the roles that earned you love, from giving up the comfort of being liked for the discomfort of being real. You're not free, but you can be, not by becoming someone else, but by finally undoing who you were trained to be. You tell yourself, this is just who I am. This is what I want. But pause. Who taught you that desire is identity? That wanting something fiercely makes it true, makes it yours, makes it part of you? It's a lie so well rehearsed that you repeat it without hesitation. But here's the fracture you refuse to look at. Maybe the things you chase aren't reflections of your soul. They're just echoes of who you were told to be. Lacan said that desire is the desire of the other. Meaning your deepest wants are not self-born, they're borrowed. You want to be loved not just because love is vital, but because you were once unloved. You crave success not simply for the joy of building, but to silence the voice that said you were never enough. You want to be seen because for too long, you were invisible. These aren't desires. They're defense mechanisms masquerading as goals. And most dangerous part? You confuse them with identity. You say, this is just me, but it's not. It's a version of you carefully crafted to receive affection, to avoid rejection, to be digestible. It's a persona, and you've worn it for so long that it feels like skin. But identity rooted in desire is a mask glued to trauma. The system rewards this confusion. It feeds it, brands it, sells it. It tells you, find your passion, live your truth, follow your heart. But it never asks whether your truth was built on fear, whether your heart was shaped by guilt, whether your passion is just performance. You're praised for wanting loudly, for expressing boldly, for moving fast. But no one dares to ask, do you even know where that one came from? Because if you did, if you actually stopped and traced your desire back to its origin, you might find something far less glamorous: pain, repetition, loss. A child who learned to adapt. A teenager who learned to seduce. An adult who learned to chase intensity instead of intimacy. You might find that your desires weren't born from clarity, but from survival. And that breaks the illusion. Because once you see that your want is a scar, it stops being sacred. You no longer feel compelled to protect it. You begin to unravel it. And that's where identity starts. Not in wanting more, but in questioning what you were told to want. Real identity is what's left when the wanting stops. When you no longer need applause. When you don't shrink under disapproval. When silence doesn't terrify you. When you stop defining yourself by who you're trying to become and start recognizing who you've always been underneath the noise. You are not what you desire. You are not your ambition. You're not the hunger that keeps you moving. You are the one who's finally waking up to the pattern. The one who's done calling the wound a calling. The one who no longer mistakes the mask for the face. In that moment, when you stop defending what you want and start dismantling it, is when you begin to exist. Not as a product, not as a persona, but as a presence that no longer needs performance to feel real. There was a time when you didn't question your movement. You didn't shrink before approval or hold your breath before speaking. You simply were loud, curious, instinctual. You asked questions without fear. You felt things without shame. You wanted without permission. But that version of you didn't survive. Somewhere along the way, someone told you to be quieter, softer, smaller, more reasonable, and you obeyed, not because you agreed, but because the cost of being your full self became too high. Now, you live as a cage, not locked by others, but welded by years of self-protection. You become so used to holding yourself in that you've forgotten you were once meant to fly. And here's the cruelty. You still move, you still speak, you still feel, but only within the limits you've unconsciously built. You perform freedom inside the framework of captivity. You decorate the bars. You sing beautifully from within them. And the world claps, mistaking your containment for grace. This is the deepest form of forgetting. Not forgetting your memories, but forgetting your nature. Forgetting that the hunger you feel isn't for more, it's for escape. Escape from a life that looks complete but feels hollow. Escape from desires that keep you busy but never fulfilled. Escape from a version of you that everyone accepts, except the part of you that still remembers the sky. Lacan would call this the split subject, the self divided between what it is and what it thinks it must be to be loved. And the tragedy is, the more you perfect the performance, the further you drift from your essence. You become fluent in being wanted, but illiterate in being whole. You know how to attract affection, but not how to live without bending. You know how to stay desirable, but not how to stay true. So you survive, efficiently, elegantly, and call that life. But it's not. It's repetition, a rehearsed echo of someone who once believed in their own voice. You're like a cage that forgot it once was a bird. And the longer you stay confined, the more you fear the open. The unknown becomes terrifying. Freedom becomes unsafe. So you stay inside the bars you didn't choose, but now protect. And the saddest part? The door is open. No one's stopping you. No one's holding the lock. The cage exists in your rituals, your beliefs, your reflexes. You ask for permission that was never needed. You wait for validation that never arrives. You convince yourself it's not the right time to break. But there is no right time. There's only the moment you finally realize what you thought was protection is the very thing killing your spirit. To return to yourself is not a gentle journey. It's violent. It breaks illusions. It burns roles. It shatters the comfort you mistook for safety. But it's also the only way to remember that you were never meant to sing behind bars. Because the song isn't what makes you free. The flight is. You've been taught that power lives in action, in saying what you think, improving yourself, in reacting quickly, defending, fighting back. But that's a lie, one of the most seductive ones. Because real power, the kind that unsettles without raising its voice, begins where most people never dare to go, in silence. Not the silence of submission, the silence of mastery. When you stop reacting, something radical happens. You interrupt the system, the cycle, the performance. People expect you to explain yourself, to soften your truth, to shrink your presence with noise. But when you don't, when you simply withhold, you create space. not emptiness. Territory, a psychological landscape where the other loses control and you reclaim yours. Jacques Lacan understood that the unconscious is structured like a language, and what you don't say, what you withhold, speaks louder than what you perform. Every silence becomes a mirror. It reveals who still needs your reaction to feel powerful, who still depends on your approval to feel worthy, who still confuses noise with presence. And most painfully, it reveals how much of your own self-worth has been built on being heard, being needed, being liked. Silence cuts through all of it, because silence is not absence. It's resistance. It's rebellion. It's you refusing to be predictable, refusing to be used, refusing to hand over your energy to people, systems, and dynamics that feed on your reaction. And that's why silence is feared, because it dismantles the game. It disarms the manipulator. It confuses the narcissist. It triggers those who relied on your emotional labor to stabilize themselves. But silence isn't just about the outer world. It's about what happens inside. When you no longer respond to every impulse, you begin to see the pattern, the wound, the habit. You become the observer. And from that place, something new begins to grow. Not silence as avoidance, but silence as precision, as control, as power not expressed, but embodied. The world doesn't teach you to use silence this way. It tells you silence means weakness, disconnection, defeat. So you talk, you explain, you apologize for your truth, you justify your boundaries, you give away your center just to avoid discomfort. But every time you break that silence to feel safe, you abandon the sharpest tool you have. Because the truth is, the one who holds silence holds the frame. The one who doesn't flinch controls the rhythm. The one who pauses, chooses the ground to rest, must walk on. And you've spent too long letting others set the tempo of your life. There's a moment in every transformation when words no longer help. When reactions only recycle pain. When the only move left is stillness. That's when you know you're not playing the game anymore. You're watching it dissolve. Silence isn't passive. It's surgical. It removes the unnecessary. It isolates the truth. And sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who no longer needs to speak. Carl Jung once said that what you resist not only persists, it grows stronger. The desires you ignore, the patterns you deny, the impulses you label as not me, they don't disappear. They just find deeper places to live inside you. Places harder to reach. Places that start making decisions for you while you're still convinced you're in control. And this is the wound that never stops bleeding. The part of you that still believes desire will save you. That one more connection will make you whole. That being chosen will erase the memory of being abandoned. But it won't, because desire isn't the path out. It's the loop that keeps you running in circles around your pain. Nietzsche understood this trap intimately. He didn't just speak of the will to power. He spoke of the will to lie to yourself, to protect the illusion that your suffering has meaning, as long as it leads to pleasure. But not all pleasure heals. Some pleasures chain. Some seduce you into staying small, into being useful, agreeable, digestible, while your soul slowly starves behind a mask. And maybe that's the final truth. You never really wanted to be free. You wanted to be safe. Wanted, desired, praised, because freedom demands too much. It asks you to stand without needing to be loved, to choose silence over validation, to risk being misunderstood. Freedom doesn't feed the ego. It burns it down. You say you're tired, but what you're really tired of is pretending, of negotiating your worth with people who don't even know how to see, of chasing goals that feel more like cages than victories, of performing a version of you that earns applause but costs your presence. So now, here's the fracture. Keep desiring what numbs you, or confront the terrifying possibility of living without a script, without a performance, without permission, because the shadow doesn't disappear when you ignore it. It waits, and when you finally turn to face it, without flinching, without filters, it becomes your sword. If this truth matters to you, like this video and subscribe. It's what keeps this space alive for those who are done playing a role and ready to reclaim the silence that powerfully rebuilds. And never forget, you were never the cage. You were just a bird that forgot it had wings.